Welcome to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore living the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, and Dr. Pat on transformationtalkradio.com. Are your thoughts keeping you small? Are you ready to get big? I will offer you ideas to transform what you are thinking into conscious action. Explore what is keeping you small and how to shift your behaviors in order to get big. Learn what is possible for you. Get ready to get big and live life out loud starting now.
Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Pat and I get to take this wonderful, beautiful, big, gigantic ride of life with the most incredible host of the show of Get Big Out Loud, Kari Knutson. Today we are talking about the shifting landscape. And this is a topic which will ask you to ask yourself, one, are you aware that things are shifting? Are you aware that there's something underfoot that's happening energetically? And then once you get it, do you know what to do? Do you know how it's impacting you? Are you finding yourself not able to go to sleep without watching 5 or 6 Netflix movies? You know, the question marks that we ask ourselves will guide us to the place that will enable us to understand what the state of the world is and what to do with it. What is ours to do? What is ours not to do? Kari Knutson is taking that on in this episode called The Shifting Landscape. Wow, this is a biggie.
Yes. Thanks for the intro, Dr. Pat. It is a biggie, but it's always, every podcast that we do is meant to be in the moment and to be what people are managing, thinking about, dealing with. It's the complex, beautiful, and funny ride of life. This is the complex part that we're in right now. And I always try, when I think about the podcast, the topics that I want to talk about, what I'm thinking about and how I'm trying to make sense of it. And I think that comes from a real authentic place of like, what's going on for me and how might that be affecting others and what I'm seeing in the people that I work with, right? And the people that I'm in the community with. So I want to take this opportunity for people listening to the podcast, think, what is the shifting landscape? How do we manage it? What's going on now?
Well, the other part of this is if you go back and you look at your career, you can't not be influenced with what the dynamics going on in schools are today. Now, and I'm talking about your previous career, right?
As a school counselor.
At the school counselor. And that job, I want you to imagine yourself just for a nanosecond as we take a look at this, information versus knowledge and much more. Imagine being in the seat at a school and being the counselor. And the thing, right? Did you have a moment of that, Kari?
Especially because actually I'm in really good touch with the people I work with at my school. And I went to visit them and they were just talking about what their shifting landscape is like now, especially with thinking about essentially protecting children and like, what are the rules and regulations around if ICE comes to school? What are parents' concerns? What are kids' concerns? How are the kids dealing with their stress and overwhelm around the shifting landscape, and who is essentially safe or not safe, and how do we help them manage their big emotions around that? Yeah, so and schools are now, going to be the next focal point for so many things with the new administration, and it's important again that we talk about these things. And I want to talk about this today in essentially not a political way, but in a human way, as things are affecting us as humans. It's really easy right now, I feel like, to be divided, like either Republican or Democrat, or on political lines where you're going to make every topic political. And I really would like to shift away from that idea of like, what if we're talking about humans and human beings and human issues that have been tended to get so polarized that we can't even have a nuanced conversation, a deep conversation, and realize how this affects all of us. Like, human beings are going to need to go to school. Human beings are going to need healthcare. Human beings are going to need to be respected in all shapes and forms and walks of life. And that's why when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and things like that, like, are you against diversity, equity, or inclusion? So let's talk about like what that really means. Like, does it mean that you just get licensed to be racist? So that's another thing we have to be able to talk about, saying how these things are connected to all of us as humans and not necessarily political. So that's my first take.
Well, let's just talk about information versus knowledge, which we're coming out and taking a look at the state of the world. I want to tell you what's on my mind. For the first time, I don't think ever that I've gone to a very large wholesale store, not to mention its name. We're all familiar with what it is, kind of popped out of the Pacific Northwest, giant warehouse store. They had no eggs. They had no eggs. This is the place where you can go get 5 dozen eggs. Eggs are stacked.
Mhm.
On Saturday, there were no eggs in the store to be found anywhere. Um, Shocking. I mean, Linda and I were like, okay, are you hiding the eggs? Are they laying the eggs? And the person that was in that part of the store is like, we have no eggs. I'm like,
Well, and
okay.
that's part of the shifting landscape, right? Like food insecurity, or where is it coming from, or how, what are the question of eggs like become so prominent? It's almost like the issue of toilet paper during the pandemic, and how these things are coming to light, and then what is being done to fix them or change them, or even information about what is going on with the eggs. And I think one thing we want to talk about is the difference between information and knowledge.
Yes.
We get so much information at the tip of the edge of our phones. Really, we can look up anything. We could literally ask our phones anything, Google or Siri or whatever you use. And we get so much information, but do we actually have knowledge? And the that's harder to tease out. And your question with the eggs, do we have knowledge about like the bird flu situation that's going on, right? Any kind of tariff situation, is that affecting the farm producers connected to chickens, connected to grain to feed them, whatever? We don't know. The whole thing is like we have to go into a lot more complexity than just like blaming it on a political party for saying about the eggs. And so again, I think that takes some time for all of us to figure out, like, am I just going to get a soundbite about this, or and get a lot of information? How do I think about it critically? How do I process it? Where am I getting my information from? And that's part of the reason I think the landscape is shifting, because we have plenty of access to information, but we have to ask, like, what are we doing with it that's actually considered knowledge? And
Yeah.
that helps us have better conversations. It helps us understand the world.
Well, let's talk about media and social media, the social media lens versus the truth. And, if you talk to somebody that's been around the planet for a long time, and who do I mean? People that have been, and there are some people still floating around here that remember World War II and remember the post World War II, but have
Mhm.
also seen the events in the Ukraine, et cetera. And when you talk to those people that are not on social media, but are aware based on what they read, what they can get, what news they can get, they tell a very different story. Their lens is one of, how are we doing that? That is unconstitutional. How is that happening? And you sit with folks like this for a half hour. That's all you need. And you hear things about, I have been here before. This
Mhm.
feels familiar. This doesn't feel right. And yet, we're all striving to get the truth. Let's talk about social media, because many people have left X because of the new agreement on how X is going to use your information. How the AI bot in the agreement now is going to use information to craft a smarter AI bot. But then you don't even know if that's true. So what the heck are we doing here with media and social media? Clearly, there are some things that you cannot deny. Um, the attack on transgender people, you cannot deny that. That is, come on, uh, cutting off funding for any Democratic, and this is true, cutting off the funding for any nonprofit that leaned even slightly towards the left. You hear these things. But then again, what is the truth, Kari?
Yeah, well, this is why I wanted to bring it up, because truth is one of the most interesting kind of, I feel like, in topics to like endeavor. How do we find the truth, especially in a world filled with different sources to get the truth, quote unquote. And when you think about how we operate, most of us stick to a few platforms that we know and think we trust, right? And then we have a kind of a limited view of the world. And it's interesting to think about how news, not just social media news, but news itself, like when you think about world news, national, state, and then local news, like where we get that information from, and how much now is considered like who's an influencer, where do we get our news from? Like, is someone filming on the street now a news person, right? With credentialing as someone who would you think of in the media as someone who is a writer or who is in media, who understands like how to give unbiased journalism, or like I'm going to pick a camera, here I'm a journalist. Like, like, but that's what some people think of. It goes all the way from professional to person on the street, and we get a lot of sound bites, and a lot of us are hear one little sound bite of something from some source, and then that's what the truth. And the thing is, everyone's so busy that it's hard to be like, well, how can I have more time to read things? But we've got to find and really cultivate our news sources and ask ourselves, where is this coming from? What kind of source documentation do they have about it? And be more discerning, because it really is what we're being fed essentially instead of what we're choosing to eat. And that's what I think the difference is. Like someone just feeding you something and you saying, okay, versus like, what do I want? How do I want it? What sources do I feel like I can trust? And how do I verify that information? We have to be able to do more work. And I think we've become complacent in our idea around that. And just a lot of us scroll through our social media. We don't even think about what sources am I looking at? And is it through a very singular lens where my supposed truth is coming from? And it's to me, one thing I also want to say is it's a lot of work to decipher the truth. And I do feel like people have their versions of the truth based on their values and what they think is important. And I say this in my talks a lot, and I stand by it. I think there are usually in any situation a few different versions of the truth that people are engaging with. Like I have my truth, you have yours. There's the actual truth, and then there are facts. And sometimes what we need to disagree on is the facts, or what we need to get, because sometimes like navigating that truth is really hard. When we're talking about media though, where are they getting this information? How is it sourced? What I think to my longstanding history of an organization shows, and also what have we been essentially trained to look for versus not. And this is the time where I think we should train ourselves, like what other news sources might be helpful during this time to provide unbiased, truthful, non-political, non-politicized way for me to access information so I can think for myself.
Yeah. And, let's talk about what the impact is. The impact is we use the word stress. Stress is really a catch-all, but the bottom line with stress is it turns into trauma. See, we don't realize and put the dots together. You can have stress from having a stressful day, right? Kids are homesick, can't work from home, whatever that is, right? You can have a day where it piles on, but there's a point by which you move from stress, the good stress, to distress. And it's happening faster now than ever. It's happening faster now than ever. Okay, I know you don't do the Super Bowl, but I got to talk about it for a minute. But I'm not going to talk about the game. But I'm not going to talk about the game.
I don't know much about sports, really anything. And I told Dr. Pratt, I'm like, I'm sure you're going to bring up the Super Bowl. I'm preparing myself to give you.
I'm not going to talk about the game. I mean, we all know, anybody that watched the game understood the game, but that's not what's concerning for me. What's concerning for me is that an entire network like Fox politicized the game by not showing images of Taylor Swift.
By not showing images of what?
Order. They were given an edict not to show Taylor Swift. And I just thought for a minute, that's like what? I mean, she's super powerful then. I mean, think about how powerful Taylor Swift is just for a minute. Thank goodness Beyonce wasn't at the game. I mean, and so there are little things like that that get under the burr of somebody's saddle. So what does that mean to me? What does that mean? Well, when you come from an era or generation like mine, where you had to fight to get the news, you had to fight to find out what was going on in Vietnam. You really did, and you saw so many people go and die. And then when they came home, nobody respected them. You would watch that. And here we are today by getting bits and pieces of information about what? Let's talk about what's stressing us out. Because while many people are not worried about Taylor Swift getting camera time or not, that's not my point. My point is, whatever happened to being able to have really free speech, not manipulated sidebars. And what I realized for myself, that's an illusion now, isn't it? That's not where we are with our media, is it?
No, and this is why you're saying, like, when media makes those kind of decisions, we have lots of different access to media, but also a few media channels do control a huge portion of what the population sees. And to your point around like what you experience versus what I do. So like I didn't even know that was a thing because I'm not involved with the Super Bowl. And then that's a thing. That's another topic, right? And like what kind of information is that? Where does it come from? And then also, like you said, how does this lead to stress? Like all of that what we're talking about is definitely how there are normal levels of stress have now turned in for a lot of people into de-stress, like more distress than ever around what's the news of the day, what happened in the moment, what's going to happen this afternoon. And we tend to trigger ourselves a lot because we're like constantly scrolling. And what is hard about this is we have to be able to function in our lives if we're going to able to move through this time. And part of being so stressed out and your brain just running is it doesn't benefit you, the work you're doing, the people you're trying to serve. And it's hard to say, like, how can I manage the stress, which can come from like too much information, generalized anxiety, specific anxiety around things that are happening to either us or people in our communities or people that we can feel compassion for or people that as human beings we should care about, like what's happening to other people. So that level of stress. And then really what I think is causing a lot of stress right now is feeling out of control. Like how do I control anything? What do I do right now? How do I manage my own feelings in a world that feels very much out of control? So much change, and so much to me like confusion, and it feels like a lot. And that's why part of this conversation I feel so important today, because when we internally can function and figure out ways to show up, it's so helpful to our external world to be able to make changes. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, the shifting landscape,
Yeah.
even internally.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking, I get insights on like mail that's coming to my mail that's going to show up. I get like advanced, this is a mail. And so I was looking at that this morning, and what I realized is I'm getting a notice on some class action suit that's coming in today that is happening against one of my providers who was hacked. See, this is all part of it. It isn't just one thing. It's social media. It's being bombarded with things that we thought we had control over that
Well,
we don't.
and I think it's important for people to understand we all have our personal lives and the personal levels of stress. Like you're talking, I got this email today, I got this thing. And then people are like, I got a kid situation, or someone's like, I've got someone who's sick, or someone's worried about their pet, or someone's worried about finances. Like we have very things for all of us on a personal level that take up a lot of our mental space. Then what we're doing is adding local
Mhm.
and national information that is essentially like a fire hose on the daily. And then there's no like, oh, just get through this week and then it will be all be better, or we'll go back to what we knew, or we'll find a resolution. And also a lot of people are saying like, then I'm even saying like use your voice, use your platform, things like that. But some of us are like, I'm so exhausted just trying to get through my day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't even figure out what I want to say. And then we're also worried, like, if I do say something, am I going to be canceled? Am I going to lose friends? And then we've been polarized to think like we can't even talk. So to each other, even if we disagree, the whole thing is we have to be able to talk to each other. So see how like it starts here, and then if we can't manage this, we can't manage that. And we do have to acknowledge that people are going through, everyone is going through personal things.
I
That
think so. Well, let's talk about what are the things we could do to cope. It's really interesting when you see it outside of yourself. I saw two people speaking over the weekend on Saturday, and they were speaking. They're from another country, not South America, they're from Asia. And I picked up bits and pieces, we all stand very closely together and they look at you and they're talking. And one of the things that one person was saying to the other in a combination of multi languages, but I heard the English part, was everyone is at risk. And they were talking about the fact that this other person thought it was only going to be Mexicans that they're picking up, South Americans. And so here are two Asian women having a conversation, and one of them is saying, get your house in order, because what are you thinking? And so even if there's not a threat, there's a threat. You see, I don't know if there's any truth to what these two women were talking about. Clearly, one of them was like, oh no, it's not just Mexicans. And that was so enlightening for me because I watched these two women and you could see their faces change,
Sure.
as one was saying to the other. But what is that? More stress. So now we're piling that stress on. So let's talk about, where do we go from here? How do we cope?
Well, and I want to touch on what you just brought up real quick, is the idea of like, so let's say we have an issue like immigration, and you think, well, that doesn't affect me because I'm not an immigrant, or I don't know any immigrants, so then I won't worry about that. But the truth is, it affects all of us because we're human beings. And that idea of it won't happen to me is really interesting, because I think that's our essentially our state of denial kicking in. Like, it won't happen to me because this, or this couldn't happen to me because, or I'm so far removed from this. And that is part of our issue with the society. We're actually closer to other people than we think. And all of us are connected. And then when you realize that, it's kind of amazing to think about our true connection. So like, I'm not so far removed from an immigrant situation, right? And from someone,
Right.
and I can have that compassion. And for those people to think like, well, what about me? And I think we're talking about essentially rights being taken away. Or then you think like, well, the idea of rights being taken away could happen to me, could happen to other people. And then how does this impact us as a society? When we lose compassion, when we lose empathy, when we have to force people to say, can you care about somebody else? Can you say like, how can I request that you please care about another person's experience? Because essentially in the United States, we're very independent minded and individualistic and pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. And I did it all by myself. And the truth is, no one, I don't think, could really say in their life, I've done truly anything without support, all by myself.
I agree.
It's so funny because every time I write up the podcast for the show and I think about like being able to write and think about things, I think about all my English teachers throughout the years who helped me craft, my writing skills. And I think about being able to go to school and then go to high school and college and grad school, and like all the people that helped me get my psychology degree so I can even talk about this, and all the times I was in theater so I can, when I'm doing presentations, I can draw on my theater experience. And I feel like all the people who taught me life lessons, all the people that helped feed me or clothe me, and all the doctors who helped me heal me over the years from things, like we are all interconnected. And when you when you think about that, there's value, I think, in taking a step back and being like, how can I connect myself more with people rather than disengage and other them?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's the human experience that we're having.
Yeah. And we're getting bombarded. Right now, I have a situation on my phone. We had a situation in the office last week, but I have a situation on my phone where I cannot stop the pop-ups. I just can't. I have done everything. Do not disturb. As a matter of fact, I put everything on do not disturb. I missed a couple of really important text messages, but I can't get it to stop. And that is an example of how our boundaries and our space. And so let's talk about some things that we can do. You must audit your information sources. And what does that mean, though, to you? Because that's very important, right?
Yeah. So one of the things I put in, the things like, what can we do, especially like setting the stage for all that's going on. I think a lot of people are like, yes, I get it. Now what? right? But the first part of setting the stage is to acknowledge and affirm our shared human experience. And now one of the things I'm trying to think about solutions or ways to help us move forward. And I do think one of the very first things is to audit your information and think, where am I getting information from? Is it balanced? Am I willing and able to even look at where I get my news sources and think about others? Can I do a search for non-biased news? Can I think about reading one article from one side of a perspective and another article from another side of a perspective, and then using my own critical thinking to think, okay, well, how does this make me feel, right? And when you think about what you know is to be true, sometimes you need multiple perspectives to come and figure out, like, okay, what sources are they using and how do I know this for me? It will take more time to do that. And again, a lot of people just like, I just follow who I follow and it's on there. But auditing your information sources can be incredibly, I feel like, if you valuable, because if you do it as like from an outsider, and just say, where do I get my news sources from, and even list them out, and then think, are these more liberal or more conservative? Are these more balanced? Do I get other perspectives? Why or why not? And so I think it's a good first exercise to just audit it. In addition, with the auditing process, if you're on a bazillion channels getting all kinds of information, getting like triggered all day long from like scrolling and reading, sometimes you have to ask yourself, how can I focus it? How can I focus it with the time I have available to digest this information? What are the best sources for me to look at? And
Yeah.
it's a personal question, but I think it can be incredibly valuable to audit, to do a self audit and think, where am I getting my information from?
Yeah. And, part of that self audit is to check your account. And, there's an app out now by, who is there by? Are they by Rocket? One of the better apps that will come in and monitor your subscriptions, because you may be subscribing to things you don't even know you're subscribing to. I mean, I found that for myself. But when we come back, we're going to take a short break. What do you think is the number one thing that Kari Knutson is going to tell you to do? Just think about it. But if you want to find out more about Kari, let's send them over to your website. Not only are you a one-person show, you're a keynote speaker, you coach people on speaking, you are a coach yourself. There are so many things you're doing, and you do have that background of working as a counselor, a school counselor, which is invaluable. How do people find out about you? How do they book you to come speak? How do they work with you?
Yes, you go to knutsonspeaks.com. It's KNUTSON speaks. And on my website, you find information about speaking, training, coaching, my show. And really what I love is I have all my topics listed. I started off as really my focus on emotional intelligence, and then it expanded to so many topics, but all the topics are connected to how we show up, how we can use really essentially applied psychology to make our lives better, and how I love working with individuals and groups and organizations to help, again, not just train and here's a topic, it's a one and done, to really think, how can we infuse this information and utilize it to make our lives better? So that's what my company is all about.
I love it. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, the number one thing Kari's going to direct us to focus on when we come back. And this is true. It is hard. Right now, the greatest concern about news confusion is on a couple of different topics. One of the top of the list for people that are 50 and over is the impact, if any impact, will happen on Social Security, Medicare. It is the number one thing that is talked about so differently by so many different people. There were those that say never happened, and there are those that say, OMG. Where do you sit with that? Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Hey, everyone, welcome back. You're listening to, this is Kari Knutson Show, just so you know. This is Get Big Out Loud. I'm Dr. Pat, and I get to take the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with her. Each segment is not just about what is happening, but, Kari is on the pulse of things. She is out more time speaking than most people go to the grocery store. And so, this is where you're on the pulse of a lot of things. And today, what we're talking about is the shifting landscape. but not just about the shifting landscape. It's about what are you going to do about the shifting landscape. And one of the things I said is that there's something at the top of your list that you're really clear that people have to think about if they're going to take on information. And that is prioritizing support and self-care. And boy, we don't even get on that radar.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to. I do think that's the most important thing if we are going to be able to survive, to really be thoughtful, to connect with other people, to critically think. We have to take care of ourselves in the way that's meaningful. And again, prioritizing self care. Sometimes people are like, "Oh my gosh, self care," and I always feel like self care is so judged. We get judgy by the word alone. Self-care must be nice. You have time for that. The rest of us are, working, or, self-care means I got to spend money on things that I don't have, or it's like wait till 3 months and then I'll go on my big vacation to have self-care, or spend money on things like manicures or pedicures or massages, which I love all those things, by the way, but that's not self-care necessarily. The idea of self-care to me is things you do on the daily. And I say it's real time, real budget, and real you. So the real time you have with your real budget, with things you actually like to do, not things you're supposed to like to do for self-care. And part of thinking reasonable self-care is like, how do I steady myself for the journey? And if I'm not okay here, how can I be okay outside and do the work I need to do? And I really feel like now there's this extra pressure that I know a lot of people, again, like I see so many people when I train and coach and consult are going through like this, in their mind is constantly on. Like it's just one thing to the next, their level of stress and anxiety. If they are at work, they're stressed. If they're at home, they're stressed. If they're listening to the news, they're stressed. And it's hard to really escape that. And so the idea is, how can you utilize realistic self-care, real time, real budget, real you on the daily to center yourself and focus what you need to do so you can be productive in the world. And sometimes right now I feel too self-care, like what do I need, might be like 10 minutes of quiet time, disconnected from things, to read a book, to breathe, to sit outside and look at the sunrise, to drink my tea out of my favorite mug. I don't know, for other people, but like sometimes the simplest little things, to like play with my cat, to clean the garage up and feel like a sense of efficacy. Oh, I cleaned the garage up and I did something, that I could control today. Sometimes it's those internal things, but sometimes too, self-care is, I'm going to connect with someone today. I'm going to share how I'm feeling. I'm going to reach out to someone who I've been thinking about. Again, it's another human connection, just to see like how they're doing, or tell them what I need. And at some levels to that, reaching out to people, maybe I want to join a group for self-care of like-minded people working on something that makes me makes me feel like I'm connected, makes me feel like I'm doing something productive, makes me feel less alone. That can also be self-care. And then at another level, self-care can be like, maybe I need to go talk to someone, especially if I'm experiencing unrelenting stress or anxiety or depression or fear that is keeping me from functioning in my daily life. Maybe a therapist can help. That is also self-care. So when you think of the levels of self-care and how that can look and how we can engage with that, I do think prioritizing that in our lives, especially right now, when it's really, what I'm seeing is a bunch of triggered people going out and being triggered like all day at this heightened level of stress, which is doing so much to our bodies, but also our minds. And it's hard to have really, I think, robust and intellectually driven factual conversations with people that are just triggered and like, I'm going to do a sound bite, you're going to respond, I'm going to be mad, you're going to be mad, and then take that anger, where does it go? So again, I don't think it's not remiss of me to say, like, step back and then really think about, how am I prioritizing my self-care and the needs that I have, and at what level, very individually, personally, with my closer circle of friends, with my community, with experts that can help me. Like what level of self-care or levels of self-care would be most beneficial to you right now?
Yeah. And let's just talk about that. I mean, who knew that going to this wholesale store and not finding eggs would trigger a response for somebody like me who brought it up today on the show? Because I never imagined that scenario, right? Now, there are many reasons for it. We mentioned what, the
The
bird
bird
flu or
flu. I
yeah,
think the bird flu is a huge thing.
huge.
That we aren't really talking about that because if everyone's politicized, the price of eggs, but where are the eggs?
Where are the eggs? Well,
Yeah.
they're not at this wholesale store, I can tell you that. And but you see, having to see those empty shelves was a little bit shocking to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's just the conscious level of it. But what about that? What did that do? And let's talk about how you go from a point of self-care to finding your voice. Now, this is very important. Part of stress is helplessness and hopelessness, and not directly related all the time, but is related, is how you feel about your inability to speak up and have a voice. And I think for the first time that I can recall in my tenure, do I see people literally scared to speak. And I've been through a bunch of elections and, I mean, honestly, but this level of inability to speak, even the Super Bowl ad, I'm still scratching my head on the Brad Pitt Super Bowl ad commercial. And I'm trying to think, what was he trying to say? How politically correct was that ad? Talking about unity, but what are you saying, Brad? What do you mean? What is this for? What is this ad for? And I've never really experienced that when you get people like a Brad Pitt who can't just come out and say, we got to get together here, folks.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be cutting the funding to the fire people. But how do we do it? That's what I want to know. How do we find our voice now?
Well, and you brought up a good point when you think about self-care and why we need it, because those feelings of helplessness or hopelessness connect with the feelings of our sense of self, our self-efficacy. What do I have control over? What choices can I make? And when we lose hope or feel helpless, it's easy then to spiral and well, nothing I do will make a difference, or nothing that I say or do, or I am so lost in this that I can't step into conversations with people or being in my community or raising my voice. So again, part of that taking care of yourself is so you don't lose hope and you don't feel helpless. And the next stage into raising your voice, using your voice, is to say, at what level can I? And for some of us, it's not about making a big speech or getting on your social media platform and making a big statement. Some of us, it's saying our truth out loud to ourselves. Some of us, it's talking to a family member. Some of us, it's talking to friends. Right? So some level, it starts with that idea of I'm going to say my truth. I'm going to talk about what this means to me, and whatever sphere of influence you feel you have. And that's important because sometimes I feel like when we say use your voice, people think, well, then it has to be I have to produce a video or be on social media or or something like that. And I think using your voice starts in the conversations we have with people in
Yeah.
real life, in real time, because
Yeah.
we humanize those conversations. And I'll just bring up a quick example that I always think about so much with my dad. My dad was gay. He passed away a few years ago, and he always got his nails done. Where at the retirement center where he lived, they took them to get pedicures, for foot health and stuff like that. And they always went to the same place. And he really liked this lady that helped him with his feet and essentially gave him pedicures. And along with all the other people who came from the retirement center, essentially to this place on Tuesday afternoons, right?
Mhm.
And this woman um, was was had a great relationship with my dad, except for she would talk about the gays and what was wrong with the gays in society and the gays. And here was this gay man getting his feet done, and he would always say, he's like, I wonder if she ever imagined that while she was talking about this, she was touching a gay man's feet, that she was
Right.
helping a gay man have better foot health, that she was friends with a gay man.
Yeah.
And he never made a big deal. I said, did you ever confront her? He's like, no, because I wanted her to he goes, it was kind of my thing to be I, I want to, I want to have this feeling you can be against someone, but then when you're with a human being, it's so hard because
Yeah.
It's complex. And I was like, Dad, I wish you would have said something. And he goes, sometimes I wish I would have, but sometimes I feel like just going and being there and having that experience was enough for me. And it was enough for him to try to almost befriend her and be in that situation. For him, that was his like act of like resistance and almost to like show up and do that. And I thought for him, that was enough. For me, I would have been like, do you know you're doing a gay man's feet? How do you feel that? And now that you know his name is Charles, right? And the thing is, using our voices, humanizing the experience. Sometimes it's just saying, well, I had this experience. Like, I feel like if sometimes when we share our experiences, like, well, this is my experience with immigrants, this is my experiences with trans people, this is my experience, like, and I don't, and also sharing our opinions in ways that don't make other people necessarily right or wrong, but like an opinion might be, I don't feel like anyone's sexuality or gender identification really interferes with my daily living in any way whatsoever, and my judgment of them actually interferes with their daily living. Right. So
Exactly.
so when you think about, that's my opinion, but I feel like, what are we doing when we criminalize or judge people so harshly? I'm thinking about, like, does anyone being gay actually affect your life in any way whatsoever? Being trans, like, name one way it affects you. You might say it affects my belief system and like what I believe via my religion or how I was grown up, but like, talk to me in the daily. If a person was in front of you, like, that's a value system different. It's not like, then do I have a right to harm that person? And again, part of when we're using our voice, it's humanizing the experience, because it's very hard. It's easy when we other people and make it outside of us, but when we talk to people about our own experiences and humanize it, I think that is part of how we can start, by raising our voice, by using our voice, even feeling like we have a voice. Because some people, like I said, it's scary. Am I going to say what I feel about this or not?
Well,
And
you're not, because I mean, I was reading last week about a commander who spoke up a bit, I think a year ago at a congressional hearing, who was just targeted. And they went in and literally her home, moved her out of the home she was in, didn't quite move her anywhere. She had to stay with friends. Why? Why would you do that to somebody that served our country? Because they went and spoke openly in Congress. See, that's the way, and this is my like World War II buddy, right? This is what their take is. They're like, he's like, yep, that's where I come from. I've already experienced that once in my life. I already know what that's like when you start to single out people for speaking out. We know what that level of fear does. And
yeah.
so we count on our young people now. And I think that's a burden that they should not have to carry themselves. So we look to our young people, and pretty soon you're going to see what happens if the Social Security thing becomes more real. You're going to see young and old people come together, because it isn't about that. It's about humanity.
Yes. And you're not wrong when saying it is dangerous to speak out sometimes. It is definitely dangerous. And throughout history, we've seen times where it's dangerous and
Yes.
people do it anyway. And there are people that sacrifice a lot to speak out. And so
Greta Thunberg is number
that,
one.
but
Yeah.
it's reasonable to feel fear in that. And that's why using your voice, finding your platform, deciding how and when and what is comfortable for you or what is a push for you. That's why it is hard to really encourage people sometimes, because the fear is real. Like, I think that is something we have to address. Like, what does it cost me to use my voice? But then I also say, what does it cost you not to? And will you look back and have regrets? Again, around, if we think about our human experience, we don't stand up for humans and our humanity, empathy, compassion. We cannot lose that perspective, even thinking about what is our role to help people that are different from us, and not other them, but say, like, if there's people on the street that are homeless and that need social supports to help them, who am I to say no, we shouldn't do that, right? Like, because I'm thinking humanity. When one person benefits, all of us benefit. There's a quote that says, when others are oppressed, no one is free. And I think about that a lot, around like the oppression of others, and thinking about the idea, like, it still impacts us in our society and our humanity when people are oppressed and have their rights taken away. And it impacts us when we feel afraid to speak up. And it impacts those people who dare to speak up. And then, like you said, that person who had forcibly removed from their home, which I didn't even hear about yet. right? Because I'm actively, for me, limiting my news cycle to like when and how I can digest it, so that again I can try to function on the daily to do the work that I want to do. And it's, again, this is struggle. People say the struggle is real. The struggle is real. But again, taking time to talk about this today on our podcast and be able to even have the conversation and create some space for this is, I think, incredibly valuable.
And this is why we're doing the show today, because this is a time where you have to do your own self-audit. And let's talk about that. I think that when we are here, clearly, if you are independent and alone and don't have a family and don't have children or are not influenced, you can become your own rock star, so to speak, for what voice you want to have in the world. But it is extremely difficult when you're surrounded by other people that may have different points of view. But going silent is one of the deadliest of deadliest for democracy. And I don't mean democracy in the United States term, but for freedom. And I think today's show is so we can ask ourselves, what do you believe in? What is on your radar? Not what are you afraid of, but what do you believe in? Do you believe that we're all human? Or do you believe something else? Now, I will tell you that I was very fortunate to have some great mentors in my life, but none better than the mentor I had when we were all whining in my graduate program, not all of us, but a lot of us, whining about the state of affairs in farming in our country. And then we were given an assignment to go pick strawberries in a strawberry field for 3 days. The average lifespan of a strawberry picker is maybe 45. These people are not from the United States always. They're immigrants. They work in the hot sun. That was the last time any of us in the class ever made a comment about people that are picking our fruits and vegetables. That was the last time we did. And not just picking vegetables in an organic field, but picking vegetables and fruits that have been sprayed enormously. And what happens to your skin. I mean, we all grow up with different biases, right? We grow up and, some of us can't stand to miss an episode of RuPaul's Drag Race. But having an experience like that and watching what those migrant workers get paid, none of us in the class could speak for the rest of the class, for the rest of the semester about our experience. One kid had to pay out of his pocket for every berry he picked that he ruined because it's so sensitive to pick them. Another person couldn't stand up for a week because she bent over trying to pick strawberries the way strawberry workers did. You see, what is that expression? You put yourself in somebody's shoes?
Yeah, put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's the definition of having empathy. And I would add to that, empathy also takes some action to do something, when you see something and then you feel something, what do we do about it? And what you're bringing up now is, it's so interesting how much more compassion you have now that you've had that experience. So you took one step closer to an experience that you just knew of or heard of, or like one step closer to from going to the store and eating a strawberry out of a package you bought, to like seeing the field and seeing the conditions, and then looking at the people who picked them and realizing everything it takes to get the strawberry, not only for the field, to the package, to the store, to your mouth, right? And the people involved with that. And again, the idea of empathy. Can we keep our empathy for the human condition? Can we keep our compassion for people who have experiences that we'll never have? But can we think, wow, that would be a hard experience, right? Can I have compassion for what they go through? Can I also remember to connect whatever I'm thinking about, to the humanity of others. Like, do human beings need healthcare? Yes. And stop politicizing as things as Republican or Democrat. And when you think, like, everyone is probably going to want healthcare at some point or another in their lives and need it. Everyone's going to need to go to school, right? Everyone's going to need that idea. And when we think about, do we need to justify the kind of our existence all the time by like kind of categorizing it versus saying, this is a human situation. We are worthy of being here. We are worthy. There are some human rights that we have to address. And then keeping the landscape open enough to be like, can we have nuanced conversations? Can we share our values without having it turn into conflict of like, you're right, I'm wrong, and that's it? And can we even look at, instead of even the bigger world to start with, can we look at our communities and our societies and then our families and feel like, how do we start there to have those conversations? And then how do we go out into the world? And especially, how do we take care of ourselves in the process so we can be ready for the journey? Because we got to buckle up. This is just the beginning.
Just starting.
Yeah.
I was sitting there with these two women, and one of them turned to me and asked me what I thought. And I just looked at them both and I said,
the two women talking about immigration?
Yeah. And I looked at them and said, first of all, I am not an expert. I don't have enough information. But I said, it's good that you're talking about it. You're good that you're making yourself aware. I said, all of us have to make sure our homes are in good shape. And then I had to explain what I meant, because that's metaphoric, right? So,
Right.
And what I had to explain to them was that make sure all of your make sure your house and your life is in order. If you have papers and you don't know where they are, find them, right? But it was fascinating to me because I didn't feel like I knew enough about the topic from where they were coming from to give them an intelligent answer. But I do know that if I were one of them, I would really be a little bit concerned.
Sure. And that idea is like, if I was in that situation, I would be concerned. So therefore I can have concern now. I can have empathy for that. Even if it's not happening to me at the moment, it's happening to another human being. And can I imagine their experience? And can I act and speak and think from a place of empathy and compassion as we go forward for the human experience, not the political experience, but the human experience.
And I think you brought that in really, this was a great show to shine a light on one thing. We are human beings first. End of the story. It is the one thing we all have in common.
Mm-hmm.
We're human beings. And the points that you're making today are to really have us open our hearts a little bit to maybe see a different perspective. Because you're right, every single decision that is made does affect and have an impact on humanity. Thank you so much for today. What's your closing message? What do you want to leave us with today?
I want to say thanks for engaging with this conversation with me. And thanks for the people that are willing to listen past a soundbite and to really think about how we can manage the shifting landscape moving forward, keeping our humanity first and foremost, keeping our mental health intact, finding support when we need it, and in the ways that we each can, using our voice to really impact the future of our society and the world in ways that matter. Your voice is not too small or too little to make an impact.
Kari, again, how do people find out more about you? Please give them your website.
Yes, come find me at KnuttsonSpeaks.com. And all my listings on my coaching programs and my speaking engagements are up there. And I love to really collaborate with people and customize programs for them. So if there's anything you're thinking about, like, could you do this program for my group, or what kind of topics? Everything's on my website. And I love it when people reach out to create something for their group. And thanks again, Dr. Pat, for this platform for today, to be able to talk about these things. This is another way. And the work I do in speaking, training, coaching, consulting is one way. And the podcast is another beautiful vehicle to be able to talk about things that matter.
Thank you so much. Kari Knutson, everybody. I'm Dr. Pat. We'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, joining Dr. Pat live every second Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. I will help you to know which thoughts are keeping you small in order for you to get big. Get big and live your life out loud. For more information, visit knutsonspeaks.com.